Okay, let's go ahead and get started today. Welcome to the City of Prescott's Water Smart Drop by Drop for February, where we'll be talking about watersheds. I do try to start right on time so that we can finish up and you'll be able to move to the next thing that you have planned for your day. My name is Leslie Grazer. I'm in Public Works, the Water Resource Manager. We have a few other people from the city here as well. One being Leah Hubbard in the back, and she's a Water Resource Coordinator, so she works on building permits, conservation programs, and then lots of other different things. Your speakers today are predominantly going to be Orrin Thomas, he's the Stormwater Specialist, and Nat Colleen, the Environmental Coordinator. And then we're also lucky to have today here is the Executive Director from Prescott Creeks, Michael Bird, so wave. So when we get to the point where we have some group questions and answers, that's how we set up the program, we'll have those people available to assist with questions as needed, and then also if they're available for the last 10 minutes, we can also you can find them, seek them out for an individual question if you have any that may not fit the topic exactly or something you need for yourself. So we just go through the housekeeping really quickly. The purpose of Drop by Drop is that there's a lot to talk about water resources no matter where you live. And so we've broken up a lot of different topics throughout the entire calendar year. And if you don't hit your topic, in the first few months, please take the calendar because there's a lot more topics throughout the year. The outline for today is we'll hold it as we have in the past, about 30 to 35 minutes of content, and then 10 minutes of a group question answer, and then 10 minutes of dispersed, and then it'll be about 1 o'clock. So we do ask that you keep your questions to the topic today, which is watershed. If you have a burning question on development or Big Chino, something like that, then go ahead and catch me afterwards, and we can discuss those as well. You don't have to submit questions. I think that's an old thing. If you remember from last year, we wrote down questions sometimes trying to see if we could catch everybody, and then I would try to catch you by email. So this is the calendar for the year. The urban water cycle is where we started last month, and we'll go to watershed, and then on through, and I'll let you read through those. This is available on the city's website if you want to just check in and see if there's a topic you want to join on a certain day. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Orrin Thomas, because he has, I think, a really great presentation as well as some other features through Google Earth to see what's happening in your local watershed.
Great, thank you, Leslie. Can everyone hear me all right? Yes. All right. So today we're going to be talking about what is a watershed, how does it work. We're going to start off, I'll take you through a virtual watershed tour of our watershed here in Prescott. And then we'll pass it off to Matt, who's going to talk about kind of some water quality issues, how humans influence the watershed. So real quick, just off the bat, a watershed is basically just the area of land that drains water to a shared low point. So you can think of a watershed as being bounded by ridge lines and has streams flowing down in the valleys all the way out to the ocean. Some key terms, we have estuaries down at the ocean, where the river enters the sea. We have tributaries, which are smaller streams that enter bigger streams or rivers, and those enter bigger streams or rivers at a confluence. And then at the river source, we also have what's called the headwaters, which is just the upper reaches of our streams and rivers. Our watershed, we are here in Prescott, we're in the Granite Creek watershed, which ultimately drains all the way to the Pacific Ocean. You can think of watersheds as nested units. So the Granite Creek watershed is a part of the Verde River watershed. The Verde River watershed is part of the Salt, Gila, Colorado River watershed, and again, ultimately, all part of the Pacific Ocean. So once again, just from a visual perspective, we have the Colorado River draining into the Gulf of California, Sierra Cortez. And upstream from there, we have the Gila River, which flows through Phoenix, where the salt comes into it. The Verde River, just outside of Phoenix, flows into the Salt River. And we're going to take a quick flip over to Google Earth, where we'll have a little bit of a 3D tour of the Verde River watershed going into ultimately the Granite Creek watershed. So, just once again, I'm going to sit here for a moment. To get us oriented, we have Phoenix down here. Here's the Gila River. Salt River flows somewhere through here. And the Verde River confluence with the Salt is right here outside of Phoenix. For those of you who may be familiar, we have the Bartlett Reservoir and Horseshoe Reservoir. Those are impoundments or lakes that have been created on the Verde River. From here, we'll move upstream to Camp Verde. Camp Verde is kind of the marker for the separation between the upper and lower Verde River. And within this Verde River watershed, we can see in purple, and it's cut out a little bit here, but in purple we have the outline of the Verde River watershed. We can see that we have a portion of the San Francisco Peaks all the way up here, Sedona, Oak Creek, Cottonwood, Mingus Mountain. All of these rivers and streams drain into the Verde River. We'll continue upstream through Perkinsville, where we can get a sense of more of our region. This is really honing in closer to home. So Halden is out here, Chino Valley, we can see Williamson and Granite Mountain all the way in the back there. And then we'll move up to the confluence of the Granite Creek and the Verde River. So once again, we are in the Granite Creek watershed, which we can see here in red. Notice once again that this red line follows our ridges, and those are the high points bounding the outside of the watershed. Sullivan Lake, you may be familiar with, is one of the landmarks at the headwaters of the Verde River. Granite Creek comes in just downstream of that. From here we can move up to Watson Lake. We'll fly over the Prescott Airport there. And just again to orient you, we are looking south, more or less, southeast. This is Prescott. The Prescott Airport is right down here. Glassford Hill, this is the Granite Dells, Watson and Willow Lakes, and then downtown Prescott is up here. You may notice, again, talking about watersheds as nested units, the red line bounds the Granite Creek watershed. Within that, we have the Willow Creek watershed, which is kind of its own little sub-watershed is the term we use. And that meets Granite Creek just down below the lakes. And then in orange, I've highlighted all of our little sub-watersheds. And these are all of our smaller creeks that run through town. We'll take a closer look at those. So the next stop on our little watershed tour here is the Miller Creek confluence, where Miller Creek reaches Granite Creek. Miller Creek comes into Granite Creek and Granite Creek Park down here. You may be familiar with the Prescott Public Library and the Courthouse Square. And as we can see here, this is Granite Creek. Granite Creek runs down through downtown. Here's the Mile High Middle School field. Granite Creek runs right along that. We've got a really beautiful greenways trail that goes along Granite Creek here. And then, again, each of these orange outlines along the ridge lines are sub-watersheds. So we have Manzanita Creek. If you live up in Mountain Club, you might be familiar with that. We have Aspen Creek, goes up along Copper Basin Road. Butte Creek, here's Thumb Butte, which Butte Creek is named for. And then Miller Creek on the north side of Thumb Butte. And we're actually going to pop off Granite Creek here and take a little bit of a tour of Miller Creek. Miller Creek is really interesting, provides a really good slice of kind of what the Granite Creek watershed looks like. It goes through some of our more commercial areas downtown, as well as multiple residential neighborhoods, and ultimately up into the headwaters in the Prescott National Forest. So we'll move upstream along Miller Creek, and I want to show you real quick. You may be familiar as well with the world's oldest rodeo. This is the old Yucca County Fairgrounds, which is now the rodeo grounds. If you're not familiar with this, here's Fry's over on Miller Valley Road. We have the county building over on Fair Street. Right behind that county building, in about 2015, 2016, the city installed what we like to call a biobasin. This is a stormwater management device, basically, that is designed to help reduce pollutants that go into Miller Creek. So because we have this big open land, you can see there's a lot of dirt there. We know we have horses and cattle there for the events. These just inherently generate some pollutants, which we'll go into soon. And we'll take a closer look at that. But the idea of the rodeo biobasin is to try and capture some of those pollutants before they enter the stream.
Is that all underground?
No, it's actually all above ground. And we'll have a nice picture of it in a few minutes here. So once again, Miller Creek comes through the Prescott National Forest. Again, here's Thumb Butte, our classic Prescott landmark. Right below that is the parking lot for Thumb Butte. And Miller Creek runs right through that parking lot. You might be familiar with that. There's two halves of the parking lot. Miller Creek separates both halves. And again, up here, the neighborhoods kind of end just before the National Forest, and we're really moving into what we call the headwaters of Miller Creek here, which is a much more natural environment. And finally, I want to just zoom out and take a little bit of a different perspective just to kind of summarize what we just looked at. So here we are, we're now looking northeast and looking back down at the Upper Granite Creek watershed. So here's Upper Granite Creek watershed in red. Here's Willow Creek watershed. We have, again, Miller, Butte, Aspen, Manzanita, Upper Granite Creek, etc. What's notable here, again, we can see the purple line, which is the Verde River watershed. And outside of that Verde River watershed, we have Prescott Valley, which is in the Agua Fria watershed. We have, you can't see it quite there, but right here is Groom Creek. And that actually drains to the south of this ridge line into the Hacienda River. And we have Granite Mountain, which drains into Big Chino Wash, which ultimately does meet the water from Prescott in the Verde River. So before we flip back to the rest of our slides and talk about water quality and how we can make a difference in the watershed, I wanted to see if anyone had any questions on this tour, anything clarified. Yes?
So, let's see, Miller Creek is next to Willow Creek, so Miller Creek doesn't feed at all into Willow Creek.
No, that's correct.
So Willow Creek is the only place that the water for Willow Lake comes from, that watershed?
That's correct. So Willow, oh, yes, thank you. So the question was, is Willow Creek the only one of our major creeks that feeds into the Willow Creek Reservoir, or Willow Lake? Mm-hmm. And yes, we do have some other, you can see right here, so this is Willow Creek and Willow Lake right there. We do have some other creeks. I'm not sure if this one has a name here. And then there's a few smaller channels that come through the Prescott Lakes neighborhood, which are mostly unnamed. So there are other smaller streams that contribute to it, but of the major streams that we tend to talk about, Willow Creek is the major contributor, where Miller Creek drains into Granite Creek and eventually into Watson Lake.
So everything else goes into Watson.
That's correct.
That was my question.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Watson Lake does, excuse me, not used to talking. Watson Lake does drain into Willow Lake through that underground, you have an overflow, don't you, that goes from Watson over to Willow Lake?
Yes, so the question there was that there's an overflow that connects Watson Lake to Willow Lake. That is correct. I think Leslie would be more familiar with that than I am, but that is an artificial connection that we've made to allow us to manage our water resources and spread water from one lake to the other. So yes, that's absolutely correct. In the way that the layout would have been naturally before we had the lakes, they would have met down below where the dams currently are, but there is that connection, and that's kind of an unusual type of connection that we've created. Yes?
Where does Miller Creek begin?
So Miller Creek begins to the west of Thumb Butte. So if we're looking here, this pink right here is Thumb Butte, and this blue line just to the north of it is Miller Creek, and it comes all the way up to the Sierra Prieta ridgeline. If folks are familiar with the Sierra Prieta Overlook, you can drive up Copper Basin Road or Thumb Butte Road If you drive up Thumb Butte Road, you actually drive along Miller Creek for a little ways. Yes, ma'am. Very rough road, yes.
Who benefits from the water in Watson Lake when I see it go down so drastically?
The question was who benefits from the water in Watson Lake when it goes down? And generally, again, this might be a better question for Leslie, but generally when we're releasing that much water from Watson Lake, we are sending it to our recharge ponds at the airport, and so we're recharging it back into the aquifer so we can then use it for drinking water. Is that right? We don't drink it. We don't drink it directly. We recharge it, and then it's available in the aquifer. All right. So now I'm going to pass it off to Matt Colleen, our environmental coordinator, and we'll talk about a little bit about the human impacts and relationship with our watershed.
All right. Is this thing on?
Yep.
All right. We turned the lights down for a little bit better illustration, but if anybody starts falling asleep, I'm going to turn them back on. So a couple things that were kind of aha moments for me when I looked at that Google Earth tour was kind of the scale of the Verde watershed in particular. So as we look out on a day like today and see those snow-covered peaks in the distance, knowing that our water and their water kind of goes to the same place was a little bit of an aha, like the scale of what we have here in some of these watersheds. And then the other thing that really struck me as we looked in that watershed was the kind of difference we see between the urbanized areas and those areas that represent the headwaters that we were just talking about up in the Prescott National Forest for a large part. And the watershed health can really be boiled down to a single kind of consideration in whether or not it is a pervious or impervious surface. So pervious surface would be what you would find out in a natural open space where we don't have concrete or asphalt or those sorts of things. It's an area where water's naturally going to infiltrate into the ground over time. That water supports that local vegetation. It also filters pollutants that travel over land as well, whether they're originate from humans or animals. And then one of the things it also does is it really prevents or helps attenuate flood flows. When we get flashy storms, as we do in the summertime, that ability to slow it down, spread it out, and sink it in really minimizes flooding impacts. I mean, there's the natural flooding cycles that happen, but they would happen at a much greater rate otherwise. And this photo is an in-city one. It's actually at Bases Charter School. Let me see if I can find one. And so the top right corner here would represent the urbanized area, where we see we've got the building, the asphalt, sidewalks, all of that stuff around to support those educational activities that happen at this place. But in the center of the picture here, we have a stormwater detention, and that's really mimicking those pervious and kind of natural settings we would find up in the headwaters. And the goal here is to kind of remediate what happens on those impervious surfaces. So on these impervious, we're going to see water accelerating over the curbs, the parking lots, and then sheeting off of roofs. And what that does is it creates energy associated with it, and that can be erosive energy that creates turbidity in our water courses. And one of the other things it does really effectively is it grabs anything that is located on those parking lots, on those sidewalks, on those roofs, and it transports it downstream. And so that includes pollutants. And so that's something that these biobasins, like the rodeo grounds that Orrin referenced earlier, are put in place to help address. One of the other considerations that is kind of tied in this stormwater consideration is that when you have all these hard surfaces basically just kind of transporting water very efficiently downstream, the potential for flooding at larger scales definitely happens. So with that effective transport of pollutants, I wanted to touch on some of the things that we're encountering and working on here. And the reason they're of concern is ultimately they're going to end up in our creeks if we're not able to identify them and reduce them where they originate from. And so there's a number of them. E. coli is one. The State Department of Environmental Quality has identified 12 of our creeks as being impaired for this, meaning that they set standards where for E. coli, for somebody to swim in it full body, they have a set number where the E. coli should be below. 12 of our creeks didn't meet that over the course of the last decade or so. And so they were put on this list saying, hey, we've got an issue here. And the state and all of those folks within the watershed that contribute to those creeks are obligated to work together to try to reduce the amount of that pollutant in particular to getting into those creeks and reducing that pollutant load. Other things are far more common, and trash, litter, whether it's windblown or intentional. I was chatting with the gentleman, and there's a lot of times we'll find people wanting to stash stuff down by the creek, whether it's some extra yard trimmings or a bag of something. That definitely contributes to our water quality as well. So that's something we're also dealing with. Another really common one are oils, and these come from a diverse array of sources. Automobiles are everywhere, and with their juices, appear in just about every place. And so we look at trying to minimize the amount of that entering the creeks. And another really common one is those oils associated with food service in particular, as is illustrated in the bottom right corner here. And so we're constantly working with food service industry, trying to identify issues and see if there's something that we can address through behavioral changes, outreach and education, so that doesn't go down the valley gutter in that alley and end up down in the creek. One of the most common pollutants is dirt. And, to a lot of people, it would seem that the job of gravity and water is to transport the mountains to the oceans. And that's true, but what happens here is that we see it at a very much accelerated pace. And so this bottom left construction site is an example of it, where we've got a lot of topography in this town. You're either going up or down, there's not very much flat in between. And so that really can accelerate these erosive incidents. And so one of the things that we do is work with our construction industry to make sure that we minimize that as much as we can. There's common best management practices that we use to try to minimize that. And there's a number of reasons. Aside from the safety issue presents in a setting like this, you imagine trying to brake hard on a surface like this or turn in there, that could get a little bit scary quick. But that dirt is really an expert at transporting additional pollutants through the water system, through the watershed, and in particular nutrients. And these are the nitrogen-based fertilizers and yard wastes that work down through our creeks and into the lakes. And as a result, Watson Lake is in fact impaired for nitrogen, phosphorus, and kind of some of the issues that abundance of those create with regards to dissolved oxygen and pH imbalances. So as we look at it, thinking about what a clean, healthy watershed should look like, those things that are coursing down our streets and in the gutters and through our storm drains, really there's very limited number of things that is really acceptable. And those would be, natural stormwater as it falls to the ground. So what we will see is that we've got a really shallow granite layers in a lot of towns. So as these snows melt and infiltrate and really saturate our soils, we'll see groundwater kind of emerging at different places. There'll be cracks in roadways and water will just kind of emerge from it. We typically in Public Works will get a lot of phone calls about that. And one of the things that Lauren and I will do is go out and investigate it to make sure that it is simply groundwater that is kind of exuding through those cracks. There's a few other things that are considered okay, some of them for just kind of practical purposes, like things associated with firefighting, potable water, and other things. But for the most part, if it looks like that picture in the bottom center with that kind of green glow to it, it's probably not okay. And that's something that is going to have, if you think about every culvert that, that adds to our creeks as we go down, that cumulative effects will show up at some place down the line, whether it's in the small pool that our kids or dogs are wanting to play in, or downstream at the lake. And so we're working to kind of identify those types of sources and work with property owners. What are some of the ways that we're, as the city, trying to improve our watershed health? This is the example that Warren referenced earlier, our rodeo biobasin. And the idea of this is effectively to recreate that impervious surface where water has the ability to slow down. So recreating what you would find up in the headwaters, where rainwater would come in, pool in a swale, kind of settle down. It would minimize that erosive energy to some degree. And in a case like this, we know we've got a pollutant load that's associated with the activities of the rodeo grounds. And so we've put that there. This was a project that was designed in-house, and we've seen some pretty good results from it so far. And during certain sampling events, we're obligated to go out and check on this. We can put those things out there, but that's not enough. We need to go and say, is this working? Are there components of this that we want to include in future design for projects that we have around town? And so we've worked with the Department of Environmental Quality, with Prescott Creeks, to do monitoring on a number of these sites to see what is our pollutant reduction from the beginning when it enters, which water enters kind of up in this corner here, and then it goes down, and you can't make it out very well here, but it actually has a forebay that allows the water to pool and settle before it goes through that circuitous or serpentine path. And at each one of those little bends, there's an eddy that allows more and more of the sediment and the pollutants associated with the activities of that site to drop out. Concurrently, the plants that are in there are taking advantage of that. That's great fertilizer. And so these sites are often planted with your drought-tolerant, local and native plants to take advantage of that, to provide a pleasing aesthetic function to it, and it's something that we see wildlife use as well, in terms of the birds are more active in that area than they would be across the lot there. And on the bottom picture here is kind of an example of a monitoring or sampling that we do to figure out how well these structures are working. And so Orrin actually grabbed these samples on the 17th, I think it was. Yeah, just last Thursday. And so we're looking at multiple places. We're looking at what the pollutant looks like when it comes into our system. And it may not be night and day, but there is a definite improvement there from one to the other. And so, again, sediment that is coloring these samples, or the nutrient transporting pollutant that we worry about. So seeing a reduction there is very important, not only for the creek, but ultimately the lake. And we also do things like field duplicates to make sure that we didn't get an outlier, that we have some quality control when we do our sampling as well. And then we also look in the stream that receives the waters from this facility, and we look above that input and below that input to see what our relative values are. And we can see a continuation of that kind of cleaning out as we go. And so almost all of these are all very, well, 4 of them were below the surface water quality standard. And this was the only one that wasn't at the time. And so these kind of green infrastructure projects are becoming more prevalent throughout town, and there's a number of them that you can see very readily. One is over by the hospital, it's between the hospital and the Taco Bell there at Whipple Basin. And then also at the adult center, we've got detention ponds that also go through rain gardens, also a rainwater harvesting system in place there before it goes into a series of plunge pools on the eastern side of the facility. And if you were to kind of average these out and during storms similar to this, where those little berms aren't getting overtopped, we can see on the order of about a 50% reduction in E. coli loading as it goes through these systems.
Can I just ask, is that just the city, or is it in combination with the county extension or anything like that?
So the question was, is that the city acting individually, or is it done in cooperation with the county or say other groups? A number of these ones that I just referenced in particular were actually done in collaboration or partnership. Prescott Creeks has been very active in helping get some of these both funded and cited. The county also has a similar regulatory obligation, so I have a counterpart there that deals with stormwater issues, and they're working on right now a green infrastructure portfolio where they got funding to help identify throughout the unincorporated portion of the county where these kind of facilities, those green infrastructure facilities, would be where the opportunity exists, but also where the benefit may be greatest. And we're also starting to incorporate a lot of those features in our street design. And so when we go through and look at street design, Marina Street, right down here by the Elks Theater, has a rain garden on the Marina Gurley southwest corner. And other projects such as the currently under construction Carlton and Cortez will have rain gardens associated with that. And it's really multiple birds with one stone approach. Those are located in pedestrian boulevards to provide more kind of walkability, greater visibility and safety around those intersections. But it also has the aesthetic benefit of having the native plants associated with it, harvesting that water so we don't have to use as much potable drinking water to irrigate them as well. And so we're starting to deploy them throughout a lot of these projects when it's a natural fit. You can't force some of these things in. Another one that I don't happen to have a picture of, but it's a really a grand example of this at scale, would be the Acker Detention Basin. So kind of in the upstream portion of Acker Park, we actually created a large detention basin. And that one was done in collaboration with the Yavapai County Flood Control District monies. And one of the things that did is kind of flood attenuation and stormwater benefits from a water quality perspective are really go hand in hand. And it's abundant there to a very large scale. And so what it does is we've got a large basin with features that are designed to slow that water down and spread it out so that the people living down along Virginia Street will not have as many flood impacts associated with living there. Because what happens is right after Acker Park, everything gets kind of channelized into a very narrow, it's 20 feet across or so, channel. And so with the addition of development upstream, more impervious surfaces up above in the Tenney Ranch area and above, we're seeing more water come down through that area. So this was an attempt to create a benefit not only for water quality, but also for the flood attenuation, minimizing those flood impacts. So when we think about these watersheds and the scales of them, it's a case where they can kind of, thinking about from here all the way to the peaks or part of the Verde watershed, sometimes I tend to kind of get lost in the scale of that and not necessarily know what my individual actions can be to help work towards a healthier watershed, better water quality in particular. And it kind of comes down to the old adage is you think globally and act locally. And so there are a number of things that are going to benefit the watershed, and almost all of them start in your front yard or backyard or when you're walking the dog. And so if we can start there and then start scaling up, that would be a great benefit to the creeks like Granite just behind us or to the west of us here. And so there's a number of ways that a number of different city departments work on this. Our solid waste department, through our City of Prescott website, if you go to Services and Safety and Trash and Recycling, has an information sheet just on how you deal with the average kind of refuse that we create in our day-to-day lives. So if you're not sure what to do with that latex paint, or yard waste, or old gasoline, or any of this, this is a great resource to point you in the right direction. And it's very timely as well that the Household Hazardous Waste Program is being brought back another year. We did it last year, about the same time frame, and it was really a great success story. And that it provides you an opportunity to deal with these household hazardous waste paints, gasolines, Freon associated with some of the appliances. There's a whole list of it, and the current process for doing that does require registration. I was chatting with some of the folks in solid waste the other day, and we've already had 250 people register for this household hazardous waste. And the services provided here in the past years, they actually will come out and pick it up from your curb. So we're not mandating or asking you folks to bring it down. There's actually people that will be picking it up in your neighborhoods. Yes?
Is that just the city or the county?
That's the city. We've got more information on that website, and so I would check with that for the specifics. It was a question whether it was county included or just city. And I believe the focus is on city, but I don't know for sure. So I'd recommend checking that website, City of Prescott, and they should be able to provide that information as well.
Is there any discussion about a more ongoing effort on that? Because once a year, obviously, people have it every day. So how about a drop-off place that is set up so that it's available all the time?
Yeah, so again, the question is, rather than having these singular events, is there any discussion about having it on a more regular or continuous basis? I think, if I remember correctly, this is the second year we've had it in recent history. And I think it's kind of a learn as we go. And if we establish that there is a greater demand for it out there, or we're documenting those things ending up in places that they shouldn't be, then we can make the case to our leaders and decision makers about, hey, we do have a greater need. So I think we're taking steps to get better at it, and we're going to learn as we go. And if we do establish that greater need, then I'm sure it would be considered. Some other things that come up. One of our biggest pollutants of concern is that E. coli. And one thing that this town is for sure is dog friendly. And so that's something we see all over the place. And whether you have a dog or don't, I would suggest feel free to grab one of these little dog waste bags dispensers that we have in the background. There's really no excuse not to take care of your responsibility. This makes it a little bit easier. A lot of folks will say, hey, this is something that is natural anyway. And the reality is, with the concentration of humans and the sheer volume of animals that we have, that it's not a natural density, and that in particular can transport disease from one dog to another. There's a lot of reasons that we should be doing this. So I keep some in my hiking sack when I'm out doing the urban trail system here. If we get to an area where you see it on a regular basis, this is something, even like I currently don't have a dog, but I'll hang it up on a branch so that folks know that they can use it as well. Or if you see somebody in your neighborhood hanging it out, making it available. One of the other things we have, the sign that's on the back table there with the little dog waste, we have those available for kind of triage education. So if we've got a favorite stopping spot for the dog walkers in your neighborhood and you see a continual waste load accumulating there, we can put these little signs out. It's got a couple of the dog waste dispensers on it. So it gives you reasons for not doing it. It gives them the opportunity to do the right thing. And we've seen it work pretty well so far. Yes?
I'm just gonna give a testimonial on that, because Matt made us get one of those signs. And And it's just amazing how many of those, the dog bagging things that people have taken. And especially we have a lot of, weekend homeowners in our neighborhood. We know on the weekends that heavy time because they forget to bring their doggy bags with them. And I wish there was a way we could test to see what the result is in the pollution in the creek.
Well, yeah, and that is something we can do. If there's a water course close by, we can look at loads of, in the area and
Well,
see.
Manning Creek is, down by, in Hidden Valley by
Mhm.
the house.
Yeah,
That was washed right down from our house down there.
yeah, and just another kind of case study on this. We did this pretty close to our offices, and so I was able to keep an eye on it over time. And we really found that once you make that impression, it stays. Those behaviors do change. And so we've had that sign removed from that site for over 6 months, and I haven't seen another dropping there to date. So, yes.
As an avid hiker, I can tell you there's a whole lot of dogs who not getting picked up on the trails around here, doing right next to the creeks. And 10 feet from a bag dispenser, or maybe some kind of sign like that around trailheads so that, because I think people don't understand that it's not a big fix the forest natural, but I think a lot of people really do not grasp it.
Yeah, so the comment was, this isn't isolated to city facilities. It's commonplace on the trailheads that surround us that we greatly benefit from. And I have had conversations with Forest Service employees that have spoken directly to that and realize it. And they actually have a campaign coming to help address some of that with signage and similar things. And so, yeah, and it's also, it takes a continued presence and kind of education to get these things across.
Okay, can people get fined?
Yeah, they can. Generally speaking, I'm not going to go out with a citation hammer and just start banging people. This is an opportunity for education, and so making sure they understand what the implications of that behavior are, what the impact it has on the community as a whole. That's where I start, and hopefully that takes care of it. I'm going to get through a couple more, and then we'll be able to take more questions as they come up, so keep them on the tip of your tongue. Another great way of learning about your watershed and connecting with the creeks that are around us is just a few months away in April, the Granite Creek Cleanup. Prescott Creeks and Michael Bird are once again getting out there and helping us all enjoy these areas more by cleaning them up on a regular basis. And there are plenty of opportunities to help out in that regard. If you're not interested in wading amongst the creek there are plenty of roles that need to be filled, helping organize it. It's a massive effort that has a massive impact on many of our creeks through town. And so I'll be out there. I hope to see you folks as well. We do have some more information in the back if you want to keep that reminder in your pocket. Other things we can do is just be smart around our house. Anything that is exposed to rainwater in particular has the potential of becoming a stormwater pollutant. So whether that at this time of year is a bucket of road salt that you keep out for tomorrow morning, or the garbage can, the flap didn't come all the way back over. Let's make sure we don't want to have the soup that gets created and leak out into our roads. Fertilizers are a really big one as well. A lot of folks will just kind of leave a bag out. I've done it in the past. I've found the right way, but so make sure that we have those covered either in a container or under a roof that would prevent water from coming on top. And as we go into spring and people start thinking about giving those plants in their yards a nutrient boost, let's make sure we're doing it smartly so that we're only doing it where it's necessary and we're not overdoing it just for lack of reading the directions or doing it at the wrong time. And another thing that we have is with our topography, we see erosion, and I'm sure everybody here knows of that one house down the street that after it rains, there's a little dirt plume in front of them. that's a pollutant that's impacting our waterway. So if it's coming from your place, see what we can do to slow that water down, armor those areas where water is traveling so it comes off the property clear as it fell onto it. And finally, those are all things you can do, but we're here to do stuff too, but we can't do it without your help. And so we've created on our website, let's see if this might take a while. We have a pollution reporting form. Both Lauren and my business cards in the back have a link to it. It's available on our website. So if you go to City of Prescott, how do I report? Pollution is on it. And it's cold too. And so this is an opportunity for you to share your observations as you walk and live in town. You don't have to leave a name, so it can be anonymous reporting. It allows you to report the approximate location of where we're observing this. It will also allow you to upload a photo. That's hugely important for us. So those are, we've got them on the Petway signs, we've got them on our business cards. And so we've identified a number of issues through this kind of anonymous reporting. Or in many cases, folks want to know what's going on. Why am I seeing this oily spill in the alley behind a restaurant? What steps are you taking? So by leaving contact information, we have the ability to get back in touch with you and provide you updates on what exactly the resolution was with that individual incident. And so those are things that you can do at this point. Yeah, we're happy to take any questions you may have.
Yeah, you talked about the dog pollution. Do the javelinas in a farm with pigs, swallow cattle, do they javelinas pick up on that stuff?
Yes, the question is the pollutants we refer to with regards to dogs, is that also something that we would encounter with naturally occurring wildlife like javelina, the mule deer, or other squirrels, chipmunks, skunks, foxes, you name it. All of them, all warm-blooded animals basically carry this around in their gut. And so the test that we do to monitor these things doesn't discriminate between javelina or human. But what we are doing is we're currently in the process of a watershed pollution reduction plan. And the goal of that is to identify watershed-wide what are the best, most effective, bang for the buck type of activities that we as a city can do to reduce those pollutant loads. And part of that is also identifying what the pollutants are or where the pollutants are originated from. So about, it was December, we were out with a consultant, took samples, and they actually created a marker for javelina scat so that we can identify what the different contributing organisms are in each one of our different creeks and impaired areas. And so we're still waiting on the final from that, but it did pop up in some of them. So yeah, there are a number of different organisms that do contribute to that E. coli load.
So, are you saying pick up javelina scat, coyote scat and fox scat?
No, I'm not asking you to chase around the javelina. No, but what the domestic animal represent a great number and a great density, and we tend to walk down along the creeks and the pretty places that are not far from water sources. So just take what you bring to the forest or our urban trails back home with you as well. Or
You said there were 2 lakes. What's the second one?
Watson Lake is with the one I mentioned, and that one is for nutrients. And so it's nitrogen, phosphorus, and also kind of tied into the cycling that happens with that is dissolved oxygen and pH. Willow Creek Reservoir is currently impaired for ammonia, and that's it's basically how nitrogen breaks down in some of these water bodies, and so it was elevated for that historically.
Is it hazard for all the water birds that use those lakes?
No, we've not come across any indications of that. Game and Fish has not reported that as well. thinking about aquatic wildlife who are immersed in it, Game and Fish has never had a fish consumption advisory associated with Watson Lake in particular. I always am keeping an eye on that. And so, no, what it means is that Watson Lake in particular, is at certain warm times of year where we've got a smaller amount of water, so it's more responsive to temperature change, all those nutrients, we can have what's called a harmful algal bloom, and that can cause some problems. We haven't seen those. There's other kind of more normal algal blooms that you probably have seen more often. And so those are the issues with the two lakes. Yes?
I live just south of Willow Lake, up on the hill. And we have retention basins at the end of our street. And does that water go through, there's a culvert, a big, does that just go straight down into Willow Lake? Or how is that?
Roughly where are you?
I'm on Magnolia, and on the end of Magnolia, there's retention basin, and across Samaritan is another huge one. But I know this last rain, there was water sitting in one of them.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem like it can do any good like your rodeo grounds thing. It seems like it just goes to a culvert and then it just goes straight to the lake.
So many of those, one of the things that we do is actually go out to many of these sites and make sure that these kind of features are still functioning, because some of them just require regular maintenance. If you imagine this collecting sediment over time, the capacity it had to hold that water or percolate it potentially could be, kind of minimized. And so generally speaking, these detention basins are designed for a certain amount of infiltration, but at certain levels they do overflow to prevent any more immediate kind of flooding damage.
Never seen that, but it seems like it's going to take all these pollutants from up the hill, like, and just shoot them right into the little lake.
Yeah, so ideally these detention basins have some settling time, and so that many of those pollutants would drop out before continuing on. And there's a number of washes that go through on its way down to Willow Creek Reservoir. And so, yeah, some of them we're finding do need maintenance. And it's also something that we look at as new development comes in, how they design theirs to most efficiently trap those from new development as well. So that's something we help provide commentary on their design ideas, and then we monitor it thereafter as well in the back.
Other than cleaning up the creeks, is there a way that you're able to get more balance in the waters of Willow and Watson Lake? And secondly, if I'm kayaking in Watson Lake and I get my feet wet, am I in some danger?
So the question, with regards to the balance of the lakes, are you talking about kind of the chemical type balance? Or
is there anything
volume?
you can do in cleaning up the water?
Yeah, so so E. coli is not an issue in either lake. Neither lake is impaired for E. coli. And so getting your foot wet, I'm not worried about that. I wouldn't suck on your toes after that, but it's just kind of commonsensical thing, just in that regard. With regards to what are we looking at to do, there's a number of things, but one of the things has been a big study that's gone and done extensive monitoring in the lake for an entire year so we can understand how these nutrients cycle through peaks and valleys, how dissolved oxygen responds to that. This April, May, we're due to have that final report back. That'll be in the form of a lake management plan. And this is a challenge because we've got recreation interests, water resources, water quality, all that come together. We want to make sure that we work in a coordinated fashion so that we can improve that water quality for all three benefits. And so there's a number of fairly traditional lake management practices. We don't know what they're going to recommend right off the bat, but there are things that bind phosphorus. There are actually weed harvesters that go in and, like a lawnmower, that collects it, pulls those nutrients out. And so you're removing them from the setting, you're decreasing that nutrient load. So there's a number, aeration is another one to deal with kind of the stratification of oxygen only at the very upper limits. So it'll be some combination of that and making sure that we work in a coordinated and smart manner so that it doesn't impede your ability to kayak out there. As our goal. So we expect that to be coming in April, May, and we'll be reporting that to council as well. And I'll be out sharing all about it. Yeah. So, yes.
Is there any consideration of having reservoirs like they do down towards Phoenix for this area for recreation or any other ability to collect groundwater? Surface water?
Yeah, so surface water, waters for fighting in this state. So there's a lot of other considerations with regards to the surface water rates and seniorities associated with them. And what are you thinking, like up in here in the watershed, having more pool-like?
Your lakes are so small. I mean, they almost are not usable for recreation. So I'm from Indiana, Illinois. We have reservoirs if they actually have recreation use benefit.
Yeah, that represents a number of challenges. And right now, I think my job in particular is to focus on cleaning up what we have, not adding more to that inventory. And so really making sure that these lakes and water bodies can be enjoyed to their fullest extent rather than supplementing them with additional is where I'm marching towards. So there are other considerations, but that's not where I'm focusing currently, or we are really from a stormwater program kind of perspective.
And the last question, I hope this is working. Thanks for being patient with our microphone. Let me go ahead and wrap this up because we're getting close to the end of time here, but please give a round of applause for both Matt and Oren. So we try to bring in the professionals from the city that focus on different aspects of water. And this one, we were very lucky to have these two be able to join us today. So just to wrap up, we do have a few more minutes, so we're available for some dispersed Q&A if you had some questions for certain people. Leah and Oren are going to work with the classroom that we have in the back, so they're not entirely available, but Matt and I are definitely available. And then for next month, we will be doing statewide, or basically state of Arizona water management. And it's kind of a next in the series. Last year, we looked at the history of water resource management, and it was pretty much the Wild West. In 1980 is when the Groundwater Management Act came to be. So we'll look at this in terms of like 1980 and forward. So we hope you'll be able to join us. Thanks again for coming today, and have a great day, and be safe tomorrow. So if you don't have to be out, don't be out.